Hi, my name is Ashley, and I'm 32 years old. Last year, my daughter, my beautiful, innocent little girl, was told she couldn't attend her aunt's wedding because she was too young. The hurt and anger I felt in that moment were indescribable. But what happened next? That was the moment I realized I wasn't going to let anyone dictate the worth of my child or the way I stood up for her. This is the story of how I went from feeling powerless to reclaiming my power in a way that changed my life forever. If you've ever dreamed of standing up for someone you love, if you've ever felt trapped by someone's control over your life, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready to hear how I took back my power in one of the most empowering moments of my life. This story is one of transformation, revenge, and justice. I'm a single mom raising my daughter, Emily, on my own. It hasn't been easy, but I've always done the best I could. Emily is my world. The thought of giving her anything less than a happy, safe, and loving life never crossed my mind. We've faced our share of struggles, but we've always stuck together, and I was proud of the little family we had. My relationship with my sister Bethany, however, has always been more complicated. Growing up, Bethany and I were close. She was always the more outspoken one, the one who liked to take charge. As kids, it was fun. She would always come up with ideas for us to do, and I loved following along. But as we got older, that dynamic began to shift, and not in a good way. I began to notice how much control she wanted to have over everything around her, including me. I didn't mind it at first. I was more of a follower than a leader, and I didn't see it as a problem. But as the years went on, I started to feel like she was pushing me into a corner. It wasn't just about decisions anymore. It was about how she treated me, how she made me feel small. It was like my thoughts and opinions didn't matter, and I started to lose my voice. But there was more to it than just Bethany's overbearing nature. Growing up in our family, there was a lot of pressure to meet expectations. Everyone was always expected to do their best, look good, and succeed. For me, that meant living up to my family's standards and keeping the peace, even if it meant swallowing my own needs and desires. I was taught to put others first, even at my own expense. It wasn't that anyone told me to do it directly. It was just the unspoken rule in our family. My parents were proud of us, but they also had high expectations. Everything had to look perfect, and for a long time I tried to live up to that even when it hurt. With Bethany, the pressure was even stronger. She was always the one with the clear path. Everyone admired her for being confident, assertive, and successful in her career. I always felt like I was the one who came second. At family gatherings, I felt like I had to hold back to avoid stepping on toes or causing trouble. I would keep my opinions to myself and just go along with whatever was being said or done. And for the most part, that worked. But deep down, I was losing myself. I had a voice, a life, but I wasn't living it fully. I was living in the shadow of others, my sister, my parents, and their expectations. It wasn't until I had Emily that I started to realize how much I had been suppressing. Emily was different. She was strong, independent, and full of life. I saw so much of myself in her, but in a way that was free from the burdens I had carried. She made me want to fight for her and protect her from the same things I had gone through. At first, I thought I could continue living the way I had. But when Emily entered the picture, everything changed. I started seeing the world differently, and most importantly, I started seeing my own life through a new lens. I wanted to be the kind of mother who didn't just go along with what everyone else wanted. I wanted to be the kind of mother who stood up for her child, who showed her that it was okay to speak up, to stand firm, to be strong. My relationship with Bethany, however, was becoming a problem. I started to realize how much her influence over me had shaped my actions. She had her opinions about everything, from how I raised Emily to how I should spend my time. But I was beginning to question everything. I didn't want Emily to grow up thinking that it was okay to let others decide her worth, just like I had. I didn't want her to be silent in the face of injustice or control. That's when things started to shift, and I began to realize that I needed to stand up, not just for myself, but for my daughter as well. It wasn't easy. The years of being overshadowed by Bethany, of trying to live up to family expectations, had left me feeling small. But Emily was my turning point. She was the reason I started to find my voice again. And though I didn't realize it at the time, my struggle was just beginning. It wasn't long before the external pressure began to escalate. As Emily grew older, my sister Bethany started to take a stronger interest in how I was raising her. At first, I thought it was just her being concerned, maybe even helpful in her own way. But as time went on, I began to realize that this wasn't concern. It was control. Bethany always had something to say about how I should raise Emily. She would comment on her behavior, her education, even the food she ate. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate advice. It was that I didn't feel like I had a choice. She always acted as if she knew best, and her tone made it clear that anything I did was wrong unless it matched her standards. The first time I felt truly uncomfortable was when Emily was still in preschool. I had always believed in letting her develop at her own pace. She wasn't an academic prodigy, but she was creative and curious, and I was proud of her for that. But Bethany was different. She pushed me to enroll Emily in special classes, extracurriculars, everything she thought would make her successful. When I didn't immediately comply, she made me feel guilty, as if I was somehow holding Emily back. That was when I first realized how deeply Bethany's need to control things ran. I started questioning myself. Was I doing enough for Emily? Was I failing her as a mother because I wasn't pushing her to meet the same high standards Bethany had for her own children? Every time I would try to stand firm to assert my own parenting style, Bethany would make me feel small, like my choices were inferior to hers. The worst part was that it wasn't just her words. It was the silent disapproval from our family. It was the knowing looks, the uncomfortable silences at family gatherings. Internally, I was torn. I didn't want to start a conflict, but I also didn't want to let Bethany dictate how I lived my life and how I raised Emily. At the same time, I felt a deep-rooted fear of being rejected, of being seen as a bad mother or an outcast in my own family. For years, I had kept my head down, trying to avoid drama. But something in me began to shift. I knew that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I would continue to let Bethany control every aspect of my life, even if it meant sacrificing my peace, my voice, and my daughter's well-being. At the same time, there was another battle inside of me, a deep, gnawing fear. I was afraid of being alone, of losing my family, of facing the fallout if I pushed back against Bethany's authority. It was more than just an external conflict. It was a battle within myself, where part of me felt I should just give in to keep the peace, and another part of me screamed for independence. I wasn't sure which side would win, but I knew something had to change. My inner conflict was tearing me apart. Then came the wedding invitation. I thought it would be a simple family event, a day to celebrate, but it turned out to be the tipping point. When I got the call from Bethany, she told me that Emily couldn't come to her wedding. She said Emily was too young, too unruly, too childish to fit into the perfect curated image of her special day. It wasn't just the hurtful words. It was the way she said them, as if Emily's age and innocence were somehow a burden. Bethany told me in no uncertain terms that my daughter didn't fit her vision for the day. That moment felt like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about the control Bethany had over every aspect of my life, about how little she thought of me as a person, as a mother. I was faced with the realization that once again, I was being pushed aside. But this time, something inside me clicked. I could no longer allow myself to be small, to feel less than. This wasn't just about Emily being excluded from a wedding. It was about finally standing up for myself and my daughter. And as that moment unfolded, I knew I couldn't let this pass. The fear I felt in that moment was real, but so was the sense of injustice. The emotional toll it took on me was immense. But I also knew this was the turning point I had been waiting for. The external conflict, Bethany's refusal to accept Emily, would now collide with my internal conflict of fear, self-doubt, and the desire to protect my daughter. And in the midst of this tension, the need to finally stand up was growing stronger by the minute. As I reflected on that painful phone call from Bethany, I couldn't help but think about the larger patterns that had shaped my life. I began to realize how deeply this situation resonated with so many others. It wasn't just about a wedding or about Emily being excluded. It was about something far deeper: control, emotional manipulation. The kind of control that wears you down over time, making you doubt your own choices, your own voice. It was the kind of control that was ingrained in me from an early age. I knew I wasn't alone. So many of us live in situations where we feel trapped, whether it's in toxic family dynamics, oppressive relationships, or even societal expectations. There's a constant pressure to conform. And the hardest part isn't always the external pressure. It's the internal conflict that comes with it. The fear of standing up for yourself, the fear of rejection, the worry that speaking out will only make things worse. These are real, painful emotions, and they're not easy to overcome. When you're raised in an environment where there's constant pressure to meet other people's expectations, it's easy to lose sight of who you are. You begin to live for others. You try to fit into a mold that's not your own. And the longer you do that, the more you start to believe that your needs, your desires, and your voice don't matter. This was the story of my life. For years, I had let others dictate my actions. I had convinced myself that it was okay to put my own desires aside for the sake of family harmony. I thought that keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, and always doing what was expected of me would make me a good person. But in doing so, I had lost sight of my own identity, my own worth. The turning point came when I realized that by trying to keep everyone else happy, I had neglected the most important person in my life, my daughter, Emily. She deserved to see me stand up for her. She deserved to see me protect her, to see me show her that it's okay to say no when something isn't right. This wasn't just about my struggle with Bethany. It was about breaking the cycle of emotional manipulation and control that had shaped my life for so long. And it wasn't just for me. It was for Emily. I wanted her to grow up knowing that she had the right to stand up for herself, that her voice mattered, that she didn't have to shrink to fit anyone's expectations. This was where the relatability of my situation came into focus. I realized that so many others feel the same way, trapped in relationships or situations where their worth is constantly being questioned, where their needs are always second to everyone else's. Whether it's a family member, a partner, or even society, there's this overwhelming pressure to conform. But what I hadn't realized until that moment was that the power to change it was within me, all along. The more I reflected on it, the clearer it became that breaking free from this cycle required more than just standing up to Bethany. It required me to confront the inner fears, the doubts, and the emotional scars that had been left from years of emotional manipulation. And that was the hardest part. Facing the fear of rejection, the fear of losing my family, the fear of being labeled a troublemaker or a bad person. But in that moment, I knew that I couldn't let those fears control me anymore. I couldn't let them hold me back from being the mother I wanted to be, from being the woman I needed to become. What I was realizing was that the act of standing up, of rejecting control, wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had ever felt small, unheard, or unseen. It was for every person who had allowed someone else's opinion to dictate their worth. The truth is, we all deserve to be heard, to be respected, and to live our lives free from manipulation. And that was the moment I decided I was going to fight for that, for Emily, for myself, and for anyone who had ever felt like they didn't matter. I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew it was one I had to take. The themes of emotional manipulation, control, and breaking free from toxic patterns were now not just something I was experiencing. They were part of a larger, universal struggle for self-worth and empowerment, and I was ready to take that step forward. As the days passed after that phone call, the weight of the situation continued to hang over me. I felt a knot in my stomach every time I thought about it. The words Bethany had said to me about Emily being too young, too childish to attend the wedding kept echoing in my mind. But amidst the turmoil, a new sense of clarity began to take shape. I started to envision what the next steps would look like. Something had shifted within me. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about everything that had led up to that moment. It was about breaking free from the cycles of control and manipulation that had held me back for so long. I could feel a change happening inside me, a slow but steady realization that I no longer had to let others decide my worth or the worth of my daughter. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I didn't stand up now, I would be letting the cycle continue, letting Bethany dictate my life, letting her make me feel small just like she had done for so many years. I wasn't sure what would happen if I spoke out, but I knew I couldn't let fear or doubt hold me back anymore. There were small moments, almost like flashes of insight, that kept nudging me in the right direction. I remember one evening, sitting in my living room after Emily had gone to bed, staring at the wedding invitation sitting on the coffee table. For a split second, it felt like everything around me faded away. I could almost hear the voice inside me saying, "This is your moment." It wasn't just about standing up to Bethany. It was about standing up to all the years of living in her shadow, all the years of living in fear of judgment, of rejection. The more I dwelled on it, the more certain I became. This was the moment to take a stand, not just for me, but for Emily as well. I had been letting her see me play small for far too long, and I couldn't do that anymore. I started to prepare myself for what I would say when the time came to confront Bethany. It wouldn't be easy. I knew that. But as I sat there, I could feel a surge of strength rising within me, like something inside me was finally waking up. Looking back, I realize now that these small, almost imperceptible moments were foreshadowing the bigger change that was coming. Every time I thought about standing up for myself, I felt a sense of empowerment building inside me. It was like the universe was quietly aligning the pieces, reminding me that I had the power to change this situation, to take control of my own narrative. And the more I reflected on my own growth, the more I realized that I was already on the path to transformation. These moments of foreshadowing were subtle, but they were critical. They were like the soft whispers of courage, encouraging me to trust myself, to trust that I had what it took to face the difficult conversation ahead. And with each passing day, those whispers grew louder, pushing me closer to the moment where I would finally confront Bethany and take back my power. I didn't know exactly what the outcome would be, but what I did know was this. I was no longer the same person who had been intimidated by Bethany's control. I was no longer the same person who had cowered in silence. Something inside me had changed, and I was ready to stand up for my daughter, for myself, and for the life I deserved. The foreshadowing was clear now. This was the moment where everything would change. The day before the wedding, I felt a mix of dread and determination in my gut. It was like everything I had been holding in for years was bubbling to the surface, and I could no longer keep it quiet. The moment of confrontation had arrived. Emily and I sat in the living room, the wedding invitation lying untouched on the coffee table. I had been avoiding it, but now it felt like the elephant in the room. I couldn't escape it any longer. I had to do something. I had to say something, and I knew it had to be now. With Emily playing quietly in the background, I picked up the phone and dialed Bethany's number. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. I knew what I had to do. The call went through, and her voice greeted me with that familiar, confident tone. She asked how Emily was doing, how I was holding up with the wedding preparations. The small talk felt like an attempt to ease into the real conversation, but I wasn't having it anymore. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Bethany, we need to talk about something," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Emily isn't coming to your wedding." I paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "Ashley, we've been over this," she said, her tone defensive. "She's too young, and we're having a formal event. She won't fit in." I could feel my chest tighten, the old feelings of doubt creeping in. It would have been so easy to back down, to let her have her way, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't that person anymore. "No, Bethany, we haven't been over this. It's not about age or formality. It's about you excluding my daughter from your life and making me feel like I'm not enough. I'm done with it. Emily deserves better than to be treated like she's not welcome." Bethany's voice turned cold. "I'm trying to be reasonable here, Ashley. Why can't you just understand?" I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This wasn't just about a wedding or a simple disagreement. This was about years of resentment, years of being made to feel small, and years of silence. "Because I'm tired of being told what to do," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I'm tired of letting you control me, and I'm tired of letting you control Emily. I'm her mother, and I will not let you make her feel less than." There was a long pause. I could almost hear her processing what I had just said. The manipulation, the control. It wasn't something she was used to hearing from me. She had always gotten her way, and now she was being confronted. I could feel her struggle to regain control of the conversation, but I wasn't backing down. "Ashley, this isn't fair," she said, her voice faltering. "You're making this into something it's not." "No, Bethany," I replied, my tone unwavering. "You're the one who's making it something it's not. This is about respect, about not excluding people from your life because you think they don't fit your idea of what's perfect. And if you can't accept that, then we're done. Emily and I won't be there." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For a moment, I thought she might hang up or lash out, but instead she sighed deeply. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice quieter now. "I just wanted everything to be perfect." I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but I knew this wasn't the time to give in. "I know you want everything to be perfect, but that's not how life works. People aren't perfect, and neither is this family. But we deserve respect, and we deserve to be treated with kindness. Emily and I will not be part of your perfection if it means losing our dignity." The line went silent for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Bethany spoke. "Fine," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "If that's what you want, then fine." I could feel the finality in her words, but oddly, it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. In that moment, I realized I had done what I needed to do. I had stood up for myself. I had stood up for Emily, and that was enough. I ended the call, my heart racing but a sense of peace washing over me. I had faced the conflict head on, and although it hadn't gone the way I expected, I had taken back my power. The emotional weight that had been dragging me down for so long had started to lift. It was like I had finally broken free from the chains that had kept me silent for so many years. As I sat down, the full impact of what had just happened hit me. I hadn't just stood up to Bethany. I had stood up for everything I believed in, everything I had been afraid to confront. I wasn't just a passive participant in my life anymore. I was taking control. And though it had been one of the hardest conversations I'd ever had, I knew I had done the right thing. This wasn't the end, but it was a turning point, a moment of empowerment that I would never forget. The days following the confrontation with Bethany were a whirlwind. I didn't know what to expect, whether she would reach out with anger, regret, or silence. But whatever I was expecting, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to shrink into the background again, silencing myself for the sake of family harmony or avoiding conflict. For the first time in a long time, I was making decisions that were for me, for Emily, and for our future. The aftermath of the phone call wasn't smooth. In fact, it was uncomfortable. I didn't hear from Bethany for several days. I didn't know if she was processing what I had said or if she was simply shutting me out. I couldn't control her response, and that was one of the hardest realizations for me. I had always been so used to trying to make everything okay, to make sure everyone around me was happy, even if it meant swallowing my own feelings. But now, I was learning that I couldn't control how others reacted, and that was a powerful, albeit painful, lesson. But as the days went on, I found myself feeling more at peace. There was a quiet strength inside me that I hadn't known existed. I no longer felt the weight of needing to please everyone. I no longer felt trapped by the expectations of others. I had taken a stand, and even though the immediate aftermath was filled with uncertainty, I knew deep down that I had made the right choice. I had done what I needed to do for Emily, for myself, and that was the most important thing. The emotional toll of the situation didn't just disappear overnight. It took time to process the feelings of guilt, doubt, and sadness that followed. I had grown up in a family where conflict was avoided, where harmony was prized above all else. The idea of standing up to a family member, especially someone as close as Bethany, was foreign to me. But with time, I began to understand that standing up for myself didn't mean I was rejecting my family. It simply meant that I was choosing to prioritize my own well-being and the well-being of my daughter. I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was protecting myself, and I was teaching Emily that it was okay to stand up for what was right. In the weeks that followed, I focused on Emily. I spent more time with her, doing the things we loved, playing in the park, reading stories, having heart-to-heart talks about what it meant to stand up for yourself. Emily, for her part, noticed the difference in me. She saw the confidence in my actions, the strength in my decisions. And even though she didn't fully understand the complexity of the situation, she understood the power of standing up for what was right. What I realized through all of this is that character growth doesn't always come in grand, dramatic moments. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments when you make a decision that changes everything, when you choose to honor yourself, even if it's uncomfortable, when you break free from the patterns that have held you back for so long and embrace the discomfort of change. The transformation isn't always immediate, and it doesn't always look like what we expect, but it happens slowly, steadily. until one day you wake up and realize that you're no longer the person you once were. Bethany eventually reached out to me, but it wasn't to apologize. It wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for. She remained distant, still unable to fully understand why I had made the decision I did. But that didn't matter to me anymore. What mattered was that I had spoken my truth. I had taken a stand, and even though it had caused a rift, it had also brought clarity. I wasn't going to compromise my values just to avoid discomfort. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my choices anymore. And most importantly, I wasn't going to let anyone, not even family, make me feel small or unworthy. As time went on, I began to rebuild my life on my own terms. The healing process was slow, but it was real. I learned to trust myself again, to trust my instincts, and to trust that I had the strength to face whatever came my way. Emily and I continued to grow, and with each passing day, I felt more confident in my role as her mother and as a woman who knew her worth. The rift with Bethany, though painful, had taught me one of the most important lessons of my life, that the only person who truly gets to define my worth is me. The emotional and psychological toll of years of control and manipulation had shaped me in ways I hadn't fully understood, but standing up to Bethany had freed me. It had given me the space to grow into the person I was always meant to be. And now I felt empowered in ways I never had before. The journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was mine to navigate. I had the strength to face the future with confidence, and I would continue to stand up for myself and Emily no matter what. In the end, this experience wasn't just about confronting Bethany. It was about reclaiming my power, redefining my identity, and showing Emily that she, too, had the right to stand up for herself. We both deserved that lesson. We both deserved to feel free, and we both deserved to live our lives on our own terms, without fear of judgment or control. That was my resolution, my final transformation, and it was just the beginning. Reflecting on my journey, I've learned that reclaiming your power begins with speaking up, even when it's hard. If you've ever felt trapped or silenced by someone else's expectations, remember, your voice matters. You have the right to stand up for yourself and break free from toxic control. If my story resonates with you, I encourage you to share your experiences in the comments. Let's start a conversation about empowerment and self-respect. You're not alone in this, and together, we can support each other in finding the strength to take back our lives. If you're ready to embrace your own transformation, like, subscribe, and join this journey with me. You deserve to live authentically, free from manipulation, and with confidence. Take that first step toward empowerment today. You got this. Thank you for listening, and remember, the power to change is always within you.